It was a golden age in Snortopia. True orcs were now popping up with regularity. The proud, mighty cities of the realm were prospering. Byzantium, Big Cave, Wolf Tree, Megahumiopolis, and the shining jewel of the empire, Snotantinople. Ore from Big Cave was being smelted down, and the machine works of Megahumiopolis turned the rough metals into dead-odd gubbins. In Wolf Tree and Byzantium, the elite forces of Snortius' army honed their skills against the dangerous fauna of the dark woods. Never had the realm been stronger. But threats began to loom. Unbeknownst to Snortius, the commandos of Byzantium, led by the grotling Steve, fought their way through the mutant-infested forests and stumbled across a secret Humi military base. Thanks to a few unlucky snotlings, the commandos were discovered. Now the Humies knew of the green-skin menace. But such thoughts were far from the mind of Snortius. He was rebuilding his war and preparing to assault the next Humie settlement to the south, a town reputed to be even larger than Megahumiopolis. Snortius secretly doubted the claim that there could be a greater and more mighty bastion of Humiedom than Megahumiopolis. But the temptation of greater glory spurred his curiosity. So he sent his most trusted commando, Snotbo, to investigate. Snotbo himself was lost in deep thought, with his finger lodged securely in his large green nose. He decided to get off the raft at Snotantinople and grab himself a hopping squig. One of the finest and rarest hopping squigs in Snortopia. A purple squig. Now you may wonder how it is that anyone could find a purple squig. But, as it is often said, ain't nothing that outsneaks a commando, not even a sneaky purple squig. Snotbo dubbed his mighty mount Notspot on account of its sneakery. Once he had his trusty mount, from Snotantinople he would go through the Grasslands to the south to one of the Humie roads that he saw on the big map Snortius procured for him. Then, on to the even bigger Humie city. What awaited him there? Mork only knew for sure. Snotbo set out from Snotantinople on the back of Notspot through the grasslands to the south of the capital. There were a few scattered pine trees and small copses, but mostly there was just tall, waving grass as far as the eye could see. There were also many birds circling in the air. They might have been vultures or some other kind of raptor lazily riding the thermal updrafts in slow loops on this warm, sunny day. But then Snotbo spotted what looked like another bird. This one was flying in a straight line, and quite a bit faster than the others. Then a loud, roaring rumble ripped through the air like the bellowing of a squig-off. It was at that moment that something in Snotbo's green-skin genetic memory clicked. That was no bird. That was a flyboy, a sky truck, a fighter bomber. Snotbo pulled out his magnoculars to get a better look. To Snotbo's surprise, there didn't seem to be any darker on this fighter bomber. He zoomed in a little more, just to be sure, and definitely there was no darker to be seen, but there was something pictured on the side of the aircraft. A large, hulking humanoid with a large grin proudly held up one of the finest pickles Snotbo had ever seen. Behind the humanoid was a beatific woman, with wings like that of a swan, and they were spread wide behind her. She was outfitted with shining power armor. Beneath this image were the words, Coram pere 5 pickles. They're divine. Not being able to read, Snotbo pondered what these symbols could possibly mean. But he quickly dismissed those thoughts. The more concerning thing was this flyboy was headed up in the direction of Megahumiopolis. It had no dagger, but still, this was concerning for Snotbo. But there was little he could do about it. He wasn't about to outrun the flyboy back to Megahumiopolis. He had to focus on his mission and report back to Snotius as soon as he could. After seeing the Humi fighter bomber, Snotbo was feeling much more cautious. If Humis could come from above, then he would have to be extra sneaky. He decided against moving farther south towards the Humi road into town and decided to stick with the Grasslands, keeping his head down and being extra sneaky. While being extra sneaky, Snotbo caught a whiff of something strange. Something stank of fur and beast. The commando got Not Spot to settle down and stay put while he stalked forward to investigate. Snotbo carefully crept through the tall grass and parted the blades just a little bit to see a large savanna canine with tawny brown fur and strange purple stripes of all things. It seemed like it was stalking its own prey. Fortunately for Snotbo, the wind was blowing the beast's scent towards him and not the other way round. It was a large creature, maybe the size of a river monster, but Snotbo had grown to the size of a rather large grot, and he had no fear. As long as this thing didn't see him coming, at least. He moved forward carefully, got as close as he could, and with one swift flick of his blade, he cut the creature's throat and leapt backwards. The beast flailed for a moment and let out a gurgling bark, but it quickly lost blood and slumped to the ground. When the thing was clearly dead and safe to approach, Snotbo skinned the creature for its interesting hide. The remainder was fed to Not Spot, though Snotbo had his own fair share of the beast's flesh. He stowed the hide in his pack. "You'll be useful for later. Dead flash that hide looks." The commando continued his journey towards this mysterious Humi super city. After a little while further, while cresting a small hillock, Snotbo could see the walls of the city. Oh, and these were no mere fences. These were walls. Walls taller than the mighty battlements of Snot-Antinople itself. And the place was huge. More buildings than Snotbo could count. And that was 5. 5 was about how high he could count. To the eyes of the human observer, it was simply a quaint little town of maybe a few thousand. To Snotbo, this was a city of such magnificence, he didn't think he would ever see its like again, though he had thought the same thing when he first laid eyes on Megahumiopolis. Snotbo quickly got over the sheer size of the place and focused on the task at hand. He needed to learn how best to snick all the Humies so that this mighty city could just be another step on Snortius's road to planetary or even galactic conquest. That is, if any of the Greenskins had any kind of concept of things on a planetary or galactic level. He took note of the roads. 5 roads went into the city. North, south, east, west, and northeast. There was also a rail line coming in from the southwest. At each of the entrances to the town was a gate. Snotbo could see uniformed Humies checking trucks that entered each area. The greenskin turned his magnoculars to the center of town, where all of the main roads converged. He could see Humies of all shapes and sizes mucking about in the center of town. He could see one of them walking with a bunch of four-legged furry squigs that looked very similar to the canid beasts of the forest or grasslands. But these seemed to be proper raised Humie squigs. They weren't biting or attacking anyone. Snotbo could see something else glint brightly in the sun. There was a very distinguished-looking Humie that had some nice flash. It looked like an older Humie, with a gray mustache squig. He wore an ornate military uniform that was festooned with many medals from long-forgotten wars. He wore one of the fanciest hats Snotbo had ever seen. It was a mighty bicorn that was a good deal larger than his head. This boss Humie, Snotbo assumed only that a boss Humie would look that flashy, walked around the square and people bowed to him as he greeted them, doffing his hat and making slight polite bows in response. Snotbo checked to see if there was any kind of daka the Humie boss was carrying, but he saw nothing. Nothing but an old saber at his side. Despite his flash appearance, the distinct lack of impressive daka was disappointing to Snotbo. The Humie dressed like a flash git, but he didn't have the sense to be armed like a flash git. Snotbo's eyes scanned further, and the Humie boys guarding the entrances were dressed kind of like the old Humie boss, though their uniforms weren't quite as flashy and their hats were not nearly the size of their bosses, which made sense to Snotbo. Moving his magnoculars towards the train station, Snotbo could see Humies loading and unloading all manner of gubbins. Snotbo could even see the labels on a few of the crates that looked similar to the logo on the fighter bomber he saw earlier. There were also passengers that were getting on and getting off, but this looked mostly like a freight train. Warehouses of all kinds surrounded the station, likely full of gubbins waiting to be shipped. Snortius also spotted an unusual-looking building with some different-looking Humie boys out front. These ones looked more like the boys they had fought in the Battle of Big Cave. They wore helmets and the same shark mail armor that protected from all the nasty beasties of the woods. But it probably was no good against Daka. Snotbo's eyes lingered on the big trains heavily laden with gubbins. He would love to get his hands on, anything that was on those trains. He would have to report that to the boss, and maybe they could hit a train and loot it for all it's worth. But now was not the time. Snotbo couldn't very well rob a train by himself, let alone haul away all those gubbins back. But it was a thing to keep in mind. Snotbo considered sneaking his way into the Humie town and getting even more intelligence. But the place was well guarded. It was sunny and bright out, and he was completely alone. He had a pretty good idea of the size of the place and the number of boys that were there and how well it was defended. That was the important thing. The sneaking and killing and looting could come later. Right now, he needed to get back to Snortius and report. Back in Mega Humiopolis, Snortius arrived with his boys. Humius, Orcius II, and Noogie Boy, those were the orcs. Then there were Double D, Tree Climber, Tom, Jerry, Dexter, DD, and Wily Coyote, as well as 40 Snots. Double D on the journey had slain and made a hat out of a very stinky striped black and white squig that he had found. It was definitely not an orky squig, must be some sort of Humie squig, and it smelled terrible. But still the weird boy wore it upon his head with pride. Now Snortius, getting back to his mission, he had some big dreams. He dreamed that a mighty road would run throughout all of Snortopia, so his mighty trucks could do in a half hour what it took in half a day to do by raft. With all the new hands, surely the work would go much faster. Do we have to build this road thing? Yeah, this is great work. Snortius watched the lethargic orcs shirking their duties and leaving all the work to the tiny hands of the snotlings and grots. He was furious. He gave them a round of rough cuffs to the ears and began bullying the orcs into submission. Get back to work! No mucking about! I want me road, and I want it yesterday! Snortius shook his head as the orcs reluctantly picked up the pace of work. At this rate, it would still be days before even the roughest of roads would be complete. The bridge over the great river wasn't even complete yet. Snortius made a noise of disgust over the minimal progress on his project, when suddenly Snotbo arrived from the south riding on Notspot. And at nearly the exact same time, the commando Steve arrived on foot from the north. Well, what is it? Do you two got good news? Yeah, I got some good news. The big city in the south is real, and is bigger than Mega Humiopolis and Snotantinople put together. Oh, it's full of Humi boys to fight and gubbins to loot. Glad to hear you have some good news. Balances out the gittish rate of work on the road here. What about you, Steve? What's happening up north? Steve looked nervous as he fidgeted and twisted his foot into the dirt. I think I have some really bad news. The Humies, they know we're here. No man do they call me, my mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for listening to the latest episode of Growing the Tribe. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a like and a comment so that one day you can receive some good news and some bad news regarding your plans for world domination. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so in order to hear more stories about greenskins conquering quaint country towns. And if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you can click on my Growing the Tribe playlist to listen to the adventures of Snortius from the beginning. Thank you all once again for listening. No Man out.